There's probably no Confederate general who has gotten more mileage and become more famous on a battle that he totally botched than John Bankhead Magruder.
John Bankhead Magruder was born on May 1st, 1807, in Port Royal, Virginia, the fourth of 9 children of Thomas Magruder and Elizabeth Bankhead Magruder. John attended the Rappahannock Academy, where he excelled in Latin, French, and geography. He also gained an appreciation for Southern values, cultured manners, and social skills, while acquiring a taste for fine spirits, cuisine, and entertaining. Although his father was a lawyer, John really wasn't interested in following in his father's footsteps. Rather, he became interested in the military from his grandfather, Colonel James Bankhead, who fought in the Revolutionary War, and his uncle, James Monroe Bankhead, who was a veteran of the War of 1812, and who encouraged John to apply for admission to the United States Military Academy at West Point. On February the 25th, 1825, John received his appointment to the Academy, but he didn't have to report until the next year, so he decided to enter the University of Virginia. The University of Virginia, founded by another Virginian, Thomas Jefferson, had just opened its doors, and John entered the first class of students in September of 1825, where he focused on mathematics and modern languages. John reported to the Military Academy on July 1st, 1826, where he quickly got the nickname Prince John for his good looks, charm, and impeccable manners. One of his classmates later wrote,
"My old friend and classmate John B. Magruder was perhaps the most elegant and distinct cadet at the Academy in that day, and I do not believe West Point has ever had his equal. He was a first-rate soldier of fine appearance and very strict when on duty as officer of the day, never failing to report the slightest violation of regulations, even though delinquent was his most intimate friend and roommate. This trait in his character I have reason to know from personal experience. John was for the corps the arbiter of all things elegant, the glass of fashion."
Magruder graduated on July 1st, 1830, a respectable 15th out of 42 cadets, and was commissioned a second lieutenant. For the next several years, Magruder spent time at the artillery school at Fort Monroe, Virginia, and at Fort McHenry in Baltimore. His duty at Fort McHenry gave him access to the Baltimore social life, which he took complete advantage of, with frequent dinners and late-night drinking. After being promoted to first lieutenant in 1836 and spending almost a year in Washington City as a draftsman in the Ordnance Department, Magruder spent time in Florida during the Seminole Wars with the 1st Artillery Regiment as an assistant quartermaster, a position that he was ill-suited for due to his lack of bookkeeping. After spending 15 years languishing in mostly administrative posts, Magruder's opportunity to see action came during the Mexican War, where he commanded an artillery battery at the battles of Palo Alto, Resaca de la Palma, Veracruz, Sierra Gordo, Chapultepec, and Mexico City. At the Battle of Chapultepec, Magruder had his horse shot out from under him and received a slight wound. After Mexico City fell on September the 14th, 1847, Magruder received a brevet promotion to lieutenant colonel for his gallant and meritorious conduct in the Battle of Chapultepec. After the Mexican War, Magruder spent time back at Fort McHenry, San Diego, California, and Texas before he was given command of Fort Adams in Rhode Island in 1857, where Prince John once again enjoyed the high life during his trips to Washington. But the merrymaking ended with his transfer to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas in 1859. Just 3 days after the surrender of Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, on April 17, 1861, the state of Virginia passed a secession ordinance. And 4 days after that, on April 21st, John Bankhead Magruder resigned his commission from the United States Army. He was commissioned a colonel in the Confederate Army and placed in charge of defending the Virginia Peninsula from an attack from the Union stronghold at Fort Monroe. Union Major General Benjamin Butler, who was in command of Fort Monroe, established 2 Union camps on the peninsula, one at Hampton and the other at Newport News. Magruder also established 2 camps to lure the Federals into a premature attack, one at Big Bethel and the other at Little Bethel. Butler took the bait, and due to inexperience and Union blunders, Magruder had the first Confederate victory in the Civil War at the Battle of Big Bethel. Following the events at Big Bethel, Magruder emerged as a celebrated military figure in the South. His rise was marked by a promotion to brigadier general in June of 1861, followed by another promotion to major general in October of the same year. Recognizing the critical importance of securing key positions for Richmond's defense, Magruder wasted no time in fortifying the region. He meticulously planned and constructed 3 lines of defense to safeguard against Union advances. The first line of defense stretched 12 miles north of Fort Monroe, positioned more to deter Union scouts than an actual line of defense. The second line followed the natural barrier of the Warwick River, extending from Yorktown to the James River. Magruder understood the strategic advantage of this waterway, using it to bottleneck Union forces and impede their progress. And finally, Magruder established a third line of defense at Williamsburg, strategically positioned to protect Richmond and maintain control over the region. By the time the Peninsula Campaign started, the new commander of the Army of the Potomac was General George McClellan, who had assembled a force of 121,000 troops in and around Fort Monroe against Magruder's 13,500 men. The attacks began on April 5, 1862, with Erasmus Key's 4th Corps blowing through the lightly manned first line of defense. The Union forces swiftly pushed forward to confront the second line of defense along the Warwick River. However, they hesitated in their assault on Yorktown due to inaccurate intelligence and Magruder's cunning tactics, which created a false impression of a larger Confederate presence. Consequently, General McClellan opted to lay siege to Yorktown instead, initiating the construction of fortifications and bringing up his siege guns. The month-long delay allowed Joseph Johnston to send reinforcements to the peninsula, but just as the bombardment was about to begin, Magruder evacuated Yorktown and moved back to the defenses of Richmond. General Johnston later wrote that Magruder's actions on the peninsula saved Richmond and allowed the Confederate government time to prepare its defenses. During the 7 Days Campaign, Joseph Johnston was wounded at the Battle of Seven Pines, and Jefferson Davis gave command of the Army of Northern Virginia to Robert E. Lee. Lee reprimanded Magruder for his performance during the battle at Malvern Hill. Lee thought that Magruder had moved too slowly, and that his attacks were piecemeal and not coordinated. After the Federals were forced to retreat back down the peninsula, Lee moved to reorganize the Army of Northern Virginia to get rid of the officers he was dissatisfied with during the 7 Days Campaign, including John Bankhead Magruder, Benjamin Huger, and William Whiting. On July 12, 1862, Magruder was reassigned to take command of the newly formed Army of the Trans-Mississippi. But that assignment was recalled when accusations of incompetence and his drunkenness at Malvern Hill surfaced. After 3 months of vigorous defense, Magruder was exonerated of all charges, and on October 10, 1862, he was assigned to take command of the District of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. By the time he arrived to take command in Houston, the port of Galveston had already been taken on October 4, 1862, by Union Commander William Renshaw, using his blockade fleet consisting of the steamer Harriet Lane, the Owasco, the Clifton, and his flagship, the Westfield. Magruder understood the urgency of acting swiftly before Union reinforcements could intervene. Crafting a strategic plan, he orchestrated a dual assault by land and sea. Utilizing elements of Tom Green's 5th Cavalry and artillery from the 1st Texas Heavy Artillery aboard the cotton-clad steamers Neptune and Bayou City, they launched a clandestine strike on the Union fleet under the shroud of night. Simultaneously, infantry and cavalry units would advance from the mainland, creating a coordinated offensive.
If you actually look at his plan for taking back Galveston on New Year's Day, 1863, that plan totally fell apart on him. The guys who were supposed to climb on the docks brought ladders that were too short to do that. The forces that pushed through the city did not push the enemy off the docks. And as the day wore on and it degenerated into a bloody stalemate, the only thing that prompted the Union troops on the docks to surrender is the sinking feeling they got as they turned and watched their fleet abandon them and steam out to sea. Magruder, then, if you want to talk about a fellow blundering to glory, and I'm not taking away from his abilities, it was a fine plan. It just was very badly executed. And if the Union fleet had just stayed in the harbor, just stayed still, he probably wouldn't have become the great Texas hero that he was. But he won. He is the only Confederate general to retake a Confederate port after it had been occupied by Union forces. He became probably one of the top of the pantheon of Texas heroes in the war.
After the war, when high-ranking Confederates were being arrested and jailed, Magruder, like so many others, went to Mexico and became a major general for the Emperor Maximilian. He returned to Houston in 1867, where he was still very popular, before embarking on a nationwide lecture tour starting in New Orleans on the subject of Maximilian and Carlota, the Emperor and Empress of Mexico. John Bankhead Magruder died of heart trouble on February the 18th, 1871, was initially buried in Houston, but was reinterred here at the Trinity Episcopal Cemetery in Galveston, where so many other veterans of the Battle of Galveston rest.